Here we go. Okay, well, today is Thursday, November 12th, and this is our fourth study group for call class. And we have Anna here and Fabiola. So today I'm moderating the session, so I will be asking questions about the articles. And basically, the topic we are discussing today is ICTs in L2 distance education. So we have three articles. These articles were written by Murday in 2002, Harker and Custant, and the last one is by, oh, I can't find it. The last one is by, oh no.
After and Stickler, have you
Yes,
mentioned that?
yes, that one. Thank you, Fabi. So let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna cover questions related to the literature review, to the methodology, and also the practical implications that these articles have. So I'd like to get started with, in terms of the literature review, what are some concepts that you consider that overlap or are actually similar concepts in all three articles?
Probably one of the concepts is computer mediated communication and also asynchronous and synchronous environments, and maybe perhaps oh, I forgot the other one, but you can help me here.
Probably, yeah, to complement what you were saying, probably blended or hybrid
Yes, that one.
programs
Yes.
in like those face-to-face and online courses. Yeah. I
Right.
think
So
that
would you consider all these concepts are related or belong under the bigger term distance education?
yeah, I would think so. I think that they discuss not only like online courses or programs, but they also discuss the role of instructors or teachers or mentors and how they impact, how their role impact on either students' attitudes, motivation, and whether if a program is significantly more successful or not, if it's blended or if it's only through online. So I think that, yeah, they all kind of connect.
Yes, I agree with Fabi. I think that they connect in the sense of that they are trying to portray the effectiveness of using computer mediated communication and also the blended settings. Like, so yeah, I think that's like the where the connection is.
Okay, so in terms of the literature review, what would you consider is one strength all the articles have, and what would you consider is a shortcoming in terms of the concepts?
I think I'm gonna start, and this is like simple. I think that one of the shortcomings is that I couldn't see a lot of arguments against. Like there are a lot of like there's an informative section like in order to know more about this situation and these concepts, but I didn't see a lot of arguments like in favor or suggestions. So that for me that's one of the shortcomings. What do you think, Fab?
I think it wasn't that contrasting. I think that uh, most of all or overall, they were very in favor, I think. They provided, however, I think that solid arguments, but I think I would have liked to see more discussion regarding not only the role of the mentors and the tutors or teachers, but also how this made also impact on the commitment engagement of the students. Because I think that this time they talk more about the role of the teacher, but implicitly they also mentioned how maybe people that enrolled in online or distance courses also were either or really committed if they finished or they completed the course, or how they just didn't consider it like a priority or they didn't take it seriously, I think, which was kind of the contrast that I wanted to hear more about, because I think that they slightly mentioned how maybe because having like teacher or having guidance or support kind of makes people commit a little bit more, maybe take it a little more seriously, unlike when you are on your own working online and you think that it's going to be easy, that I'm going to have all the time in the world and I will organize my time. But at the end of the day, it's not only about that, it's about the levels of engagement and commitment. And I think I would have liked to see a little bit more about that in these articles.
I agree. Um, well, every time I read an article, towards the end, when you have the discussion and the conclusions, it always seems like authors realize that there's a concept that they didn't consider, or there's a concept that they suggest that should be looked at. So in this case, what do you think is a concept that the theoretical framework in any of these articles was missing?
Hmm.
I think that it was in the Harker and Kutsatoni. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I think that towards the end they mentioned something about um, commitment levels and motivation, but they also say that, okay, this study was not focused on that. So I think that if they were bringing that up, it would have been important to discuss it a little more in depth by the beginning of the article, or even in their study, which this was the one that had like two groups. So I think that it would have been nice also if they would have either talk about it a little more in depth or not really mention it at all, because it was very brief. It was not very meaningful or relevant.
Yeah, because it seemed like they knew motivation was something important, but they just decided not to consider it anyway. So that was kind of like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
To me, there's this the article of learners and teachers' perspectives, and they make a lot of emphasis on the qualitative inquiry, and I see the point for them to discuss that in the literature review. However, I think that there was missing a little bit more about the effects of instructional technology upon the curriculum. I think it would be interesting to find more about arguments and or different studies that have applied that, and maybe with the connections of the qualitative paradigm or assessment. That's what I think.
And
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that also on this one that I mentioned, I think that they also mentioned something about discussing difficulties with technology. They also say, okay, but this study did not investigate this. So I think that just like I mentioned before, I would have either liked them to go a little more in depth in that, because I think that it's also an important factor on the success or failure of an online program. And obviously, it also has to do with how much assistance or support a learner might need if they're not very good with technology. So they could have discussed that a little more in depth, or not at all, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with Fabi.
Okay, so before we move on to the methodology, I'd like to throw in another concept that I think I identified, and that was autonomy. So we're talking about a blended learning setting. So it seems like, and sometimes autonomy can be confused with motivation, because maybe an autonomous student is a motivated student, or vice versa. But I thought that they also touched on all three articles on this, commitment, on this autonomy, on how the students need to be organized. And it is interesting to see that they expect the students to have this already, and why not including or designing a program that will also help them gain that autonomy, because like developing autonomy on a student is really hard on face-to-face settings. So I mean, I think blended learning students or online students need it even more. So
But there is actually one article that mentioned that they had an induction day, something, and I mean maybe it wasn't like the best induction, or I don't know, we don't know. But I think they were trying to at least assess students or support students to know how to use those websites. And but and I think we're gonna discuss that later. But it is fun. It is funny that you mentioned that because some of the results show that students didn't even like the induction. Like they mentioned, like I think that we're wasting time on being presented how to use the platforms, and I think that's more. It is better to have more time to use it for language instruction than instructions on how to take these courses online. So it's interesting that you mentioned because I agree with you, but now the students' perspectives are different sometimes. Yes.
I think it's very I would think to I mean I would consider this to be a little complex because I think that they do mention that teachers just cannot only rely on students' commitment or motivation because as we have learned in previous articles as well, there's a pattern. Like at one point you may be engaged, at the other you may lose a little bit of interest. But I think that this is like something that takes um, both commitment from the teacher or the tutor and also the student. So I think that you cannot simply rely on one or the other. It's like a teamwork or something. That's the sense that that is kind of like the message that I got like from these articles that you can rely only on one side of the equation. You have to be properly trained in order to assist the students not only on technical aspects but also on pedagogical, language teaching. But also students have to be committed and be autonomous, as you were saying, and that is something that maybe, as you mentioned, they could create. I don't know, some sort of even workshop, I would say, in order to help students to maybe organize their time, to maybe acquire skills or strategies, because this is also part of, I don't know, developing attitudes. I don't know if that's a word, but I think that it does take a lot of autonomy and responsibility.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're moving on to the methodology and data collection section. So all three articles in Nature share the qualitative / mixed method paradigm, except for one where I didn't really know what they did. Yeah, it was just like there was an appendix with an interview, and then it was like, what? There was no methodology section. So how do you get this information? So let's first look at the commonalities. So in terms of participants, in terms of collecting data, and in terms of what they wanted to analyze, what were some commonalities in all three articles, and then that will eventually share the differences of the articles in terms of participants, maybe in terms of um, methods of data collection and how they process it.
Okay, yes, I think that I think it was what I thought that was different from the others, the other articles we've read so far. I think it's that they considered both students' perceptions and also teachers. I think that the one that they had like two groups, right? One group was blended modality, and the other was like only online. And they also mentioned about how both groups, regardless of achieving almost the same kind of improvement, their commitment was really different. So I thought this was very interesting because I think that this, as we've mentioned before, it is kind of complicated when they either focus on a quantitative or a qualitative, and usually when they mix both, it's not very I don't know, solid. But in this one, I thought that it was interesting because they also have interviews, and they also consider the levels of satisfaction or something like that, which I think that also play an important factor on whether a person may stay or not in a program. So I think that out of the two that consider quantitative and qualitative was fine. And the other one you mentioned, I don't know, I couldn't understand quite well if it was just an article or if they were trying to create a framework, I think, for the, I don't know, training or the skills that online tutor needed. So that one I didn't really understand so well. Where did they get the data from, or what was the intention?
Yes, I agree with both of you. I think two of the articles were really organized and structured in terms of the methodology. They really explain what they were trying to, what they did, and the other one lacked of information and the procedures. And for me, I think that I really like the article where it is mentioned that the first of all that they had these pre and post tests, and I think that is a good technique or tool to use because you get information or data from at the beginning and then you test it later. I really like that. I also like the entrance kind of test that they apply to the students where they are asking their needs. And I think that's really good because when you design a program, you don't only want to focus on what I don't know, what the theory is saying or what you want to apply in your classroom, but also what the students' needs are and the difficulties, the challenges, their objectives with the classroom, and more if the classroom is conducted via like online through webs or um, in platforms. So that's something I really like to see in the methodology. And yeah, I mean, so far,
I think I agree with you. I thought it was very, every time that I read an article and I see that they actually created the, the materials they used, and I thought this was very interesting that they designed them based on the needs. But as you mentioned, it is really difficult to meet every single student needs, especially because I think that these groups were like different kind of professions, like people that had pretty much nothing to do between their professions. So it was not discipline specific. So I think it probably met their needs at some extent, but probably not entirely, which I think it's really challenging. I mean, it would take a lot of time, but I did appreciate that they consider the learners and their needs at some extent. So yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, so looking at, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the appendices with the questionnaires, and I found some of the questions to be a little leading, a little like, so what's your opinion on the instruments? Because there were lots of questions. So there's always a chance to, maybe lead your participants a bit or not to include questions that might have been more useful. So in terms of the questions, what do you think of them in general?
that's a good question. um, I never like it is enlightening because I never saw it that way. Like what I will have to say with leading questions is that of course they lead you to answer what you want to hear, right? But I think that it is also the researchers' skills to continue with follow-up questions, and there's nothing about that in the procedures. Like they never were explicit on like how they. Uh, I mean, they mentioned the interviews, but I think that they weren't explicit on how the procedures for the interview were like. Like okay, out of 50 questions, we only consider 20, and we continue with follow-up questions, or there were other questions that arose in the interview. So I would say the leading questions are something that you need to worry about, and to know like how to mediate those questions and how to uh, ask your participants. So yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's the only thing I have to say about that.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that it can be somehow leading. I think that also they kind of, I felt, I don't know, I got this perception that they kind of overlooked the negative feedback that they got. They didn't consider it that relevant. So I was like, okay, there's nothing wrong with negative feedback. It does communicate something as well. It does provide information. So um, I think that in that sense, they could have discussed a little bit more the negative outcomes or perceptions that they got. Also, as you were mentioning, I think that when you are designing like interviews or questionnaires, it is kind of difficult not to lead to the answers you may want to hear or that you are already expecting. So I think that this could be kind of misleading somehow. And I think that in these articles, everything seemed to be even kind of what is the word I'm looking at? I'm looking for even kind of predictable. I was sort of like already expecting those answers. So I think that it may have to do with the design of the interviews.
Yes.
Even there was a focus group, I think, also in one of the articles. So yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, when you're working with perceptions as well, it's quite hard not to lead or be subjective, I think.
Yeah. So last question related to methodology before we move to the conclusions and implications. Um, we have been looking at articles and we have identified that most of them are lacking like L2 theories of acquisition. Do you think it's okay for articles that are related to L2 teaching? Is it okay for them to sometimes not look at the L2 theory and look at the more pedagogical part? Or did it bother you to not know perhaps how the courses were designed, what language was used? Because most of the participants complain about the wording of the instructions. So my question would be, do you think as a reader, would you need that L2, or would you need to see the author really grounding all these websites on L2 theories, or is it just sufficient to maybe say I'm only looking at pedagogy and the success of the software?
I would consider that in pretty much any research you are conducting, I'm sorry, you have to be very specific. You have to narrow it down to, I mean, if you're talking about not only pedagogical theory and all of that, but you're also talking about second language acquisition, you have to, I mean, you have to target that, you have to talk about it. And as you mentioned, I think it would be even useful or a good source of information if you, like, as you said, if they discuss a little bit more about how they designed um, the material, even the, I don't know, instruments. They, like, for example, in the one that you said that we didn't know if it was a study or an article or what happened there, they talk about building this pyramid of skills, and I think that it could also would have been a little more enlightening if they would have provided a little bit more of that L2 acquisition, not only like technical or basic CTI training.
Yeah, like tell us how, like they all these skills sound nice, but how?
What if I want to replicate it or try to do my own framework? How could I go about it? What could I don't know, look at in order to do so? That would have been interesting as well, because
Yeah.
I think that they also talk about training they provided for the tutors as well. So I think it would have been interesting, because nowadays I think that we really need um, to provide teachers with training for these particular online scenarios. I mean, it's what we're all dealing with right now.
So, in my opinion, I can see it in two ways. The one that Fabio already mentioned, as a researcher, like the point of view as a researcher, and for me to read these articles that are lacking the theoretical frameworks or the SLA theories. I think that, of course, those theories provide validity to your study. And what if I want to replicate them? You know, so yes, in as the point of view of a researcher, I think that I would be expecting a little bit more. However, I think that um, we've been told that these type of articles are more into they are not really teachers per se, or they are not into teaching, right? So they are more like researchers of technology and in L2 classrooms, right? So uh, I think, and then my second point of view, which is like the point of view as a reader, someone who's a student or something, I think that you have to know, you have to be selective, and you have to understand what you're reading and to know that something else is missing there. So not to rely, not only to rely on this article only because, you know, oh, the skills, the pyramid of skills, oh, that looks interesting, and yeah, that's what teachers are missing for the instruction or whatever, right? But okay, you have that information. Now how can you support this information with language, which is the most important, like one of the most important elements in our profession, right? That we're not only teachers, we are language teachers. So I think that as a reader, as a student, we need to be aware that there are other things that we need to consider. So yes.
Okay, so this is the final question. So we saw, except maybe on the article about training teachers, we saw that the two articles have these findings and these implications for teachers who want to learn, um, through blended learning or a hybrid form. And critically looking at them, um, what do you think about these findings, and what's lacking in the findings in your opinion, if there's anything lacking, of course?
Okay, I want to mention something that you mentioned already, and I think it was like we can see it coming because the questions were leading questions. I think that it was obvious, like the themes or that what the excerpts were going to be about, right? And one of the articles, the themes, I mean, they mentioned it before. They say that the themes were going to be about the summative feedback, the formative feedback, and I don't remember the other two, but so we were expecting that, like those results. And the results would only show if they were positive, negative, or neutral, or something else that was there, right? And now for the perceptions and the other article, I think it was a little bit more open, and the results show, like it wasn't that explicit, like the results weren't that explicit. It was interesting to read them because they were talking about the control materials, about training, the teachers, like the data they found from teachers, the data they found for students. I really like to see that because it gave me more, like a wider panorama of their perceptions, both of the perceptions. So yeah, I mean, that's the only thing right now that
Okay, I do agree. I think it was kind of predictable, as we have mentioned, but I think that more than just trying to either prove what works best, I think it is important to consider that it's not just like a one-sided issue. It takes proper training and guidance, not only from the tutors, but also from the students. So I think that rather than just trying to find what is most effective, we have to take that into consideration. I mean, it depends on the teacher, it depends on the student, And if there's not commitment, if there's no training, it won't be as successful as expected. So I think that, yeah, I would have liked to see a little more like strong stance on either one side or the other, or either in the middle, but a little more concise or like stronger in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, also when you have linguistic data, that helps a lot. You know, it's like they felt differently about the website, but I don't know, we have evidence, like hard evidence, in terms of the acquisition of English for academic purposes skills, or in terms of like acquisition of something. But yeah, well, this was an interesting conversation. Thank you for participating. This is the end of our study group. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.